All right, now that we've covered supply side economics, we can start talking about demand side theory. And we want to start out with the demand side explanation or illustration of how the economy responds to recession. And then we'll talk about demand side policy consistent with that main idea. Now, demand side theory recognizes that markets might work well most of the time, or maybe under some conditions, but markets don't always work well. And when they fail to work properly, when markets don't work right, there's not much to do except for turn to government to intervene in the market. And what we're particularly interested in here is government intervention when you have a recession. Demand side economics, as we'll illustrate, will show that the economy doesn't recover. The signals and incentives that are created in a market take too long to correct the economy. In the intervening period, the economy starts rolling downhill and gaining speed. Things get worse before they get better. All right, so we're going to use the same tools, aggregate supply, aggregate demand, to illustrate how the product and labor markets do not adjust in a recession and how the recession gets worse without intervention. So we're going to start out with a high level of economic activity, just like we did before. We'll look at the slide here in just a moment. We have GDP, we're at Q star. The only unemployment that we have is natural unemployment. This looks a lot like the supply side. The steps are going to be the same as they were with the supply side explanation of a recession. So we start out at Q star, and that's a high enough level of economic activity where the unemployment rate is just the natural rate, 5.1%. We have a recession start for the same reason. Let's say that companies think that the economy's been doing well, but costs are starting to rise, demand's starting to fall off a little bit, or at least they perceive that the future is not going to be as profitable as the past was. So they're going to cut back on their investment spending, they'll lay off some workers, so I goes down and maybe C goes down because of increased unemployment. The end result is the demand curve shifts from 81 to 82. When the demand curve shifts at that price level, there's a surplus of goods and services that are produced in the economy. That's going to drive us down to this. That's a signal the price should go down. We move down to this equilibrium, this price level, and this level of economic activity, where now we have some layoffs, so our unemployment rate is going to be higher than the natural rate. Again, about 1.7 percentage points of that are due to cyclical unemployment. All right, so that sounds a lot like the typical supply side explanation. And then we can also think when we have reduced economic activity, when we're at this level of output and we have a higher unemployment rate, then what that means is that unemployment is a surplus of labor. It's a signal that wages are too high and that they should go down. That's the signal. It's always there. But for demand side economics, and what John Maynard Keynes argued during the Great Recession, is that wages don't adjust. They're sticky downward, which means wages won't go down. Well, why? There are several reasons why wages may not fall. There could be a minimum wage, which means the wage can't fall below a certain level. Or there may be a contractual agreement, say between a union and a group of employers, that sets that wage over a number of years. And if there's a recession in that period, there might be a surplus of labor, but the contract's the contract. It states the wage. Other factors that might be more significant would be that when we compete for jobs with other people, we don't necessarily compete on the basis of wages. All right, think about this. When you go to apply for a job, you usually try to convince the employer to hire you because you're uniquely qualified, you're a good hard worker, you're disciplined, and you've got the skills and training and background and experience to be able to do that job. You don't say, I will take that job for less money than everyone else. If you were to do that, say you go to a job interview, you graduate from college, you go to a entry-level sales position and say that they're offering the job at 35,000. You go in, you interview for the position. You say, okay, let's cut to the chase right here. How much you paying? How much you are willing to pay for this job? 35,000. Okay, I'll do the job for 30. Now, how's that employer going to react to that? They're going to think you're a little bit crazy for doing that because they're willing to pay 30. What they want is the best employee at 30. If you say you're going to take it for less, they're going to think something's wrong with you. They're going to think something's wrong with you in terms of your qualifications. Maybe you aren't as skilled as everybody else. All right? So that's not, we may, if things get bad enough, if we, in a recession, if we can't find work, we may take a wage cut. But for Keynes, he'd argue by the time that happens, it's going to take too long, and that the intervening period is going to make the recession worse. Okay? Think about this as a way of illustrating. Because of these factors, particularly this one, generally we think we have skills and we're worth what our skills are. So if you've been making packs for $12 an hour, you think that your skill, and you've been doing this for quite a while, you think that you're worth $12 an hour because you have certain skills that are valuable, and you get laid off, you're probably going to think, well, let's see, before I go back and beg for my job back and go back to $9 an hour, I'd prefer to wait and see what happens. Because maybe they laid me off maybe next month, or maybe in 2 months they'll take me back. I might as well hold out for $12 because when they take me back, they're probably going to take me back for $12. Why panic and go there and sell myself short and offer my job for $9 or $8 when my skills say I'm worth 12? All right. So for that reason, we might think that the unemployed might accept a period where they're unemployed before they take a wage cut. So what happens in that intervening period? The market's not adjusting, right? The economy's not adjusting. We don't have unemployment putting downward pressure on wages and workers taking a wage cut, and then that supply curve moving us back to Q star. We're kind of stuck right here. And what happens while workers are waiting to see what happens is that their incomes are going down, their spending is going down. So instead of this thing adjusting back, the supply curve moving back to bring us back to Q star, as was the case with the supply side argument, if people's incomes are going down, spending is going down, then what's likely to happen? Their demand is going to keep decreasing. It's going to shift out this way. And when it shifts out that way, what's happening to the recession? Is it getting better or getting worse? It's getting worse. And we might think that as it gets worse, what are companies going to think? Companies thought they cut back in their spending because they thought things were going to get worse. Now we have a self-fulfilling prophecy. They thought things got worse, and what happened? They sure enough got worse. And what's going to happen? It looks like it's even getting worse. So what's happening to the ball of the economy? With demand side theory, the view is the ball is balanced on a hill. And what keeps it balanced on the top of that hill is spending. Well, if there's a reduction in spending, that ball starts rolling down. And what happens is that economy just gets worse and worse and worse, and it's not getting any better. That's the thing. And this is the idea, this quote here. In the long run, in supply side economics, eventually workers will take a wage cut, and that supply curve will shift back. We'll move back to Q star. But Keynes is saying in the long run that would take so long we'd all be dead by then. And in the short run, things can get much worse. And even eventually, when the economy is spiraling downhill and the demand keeps shifting down, 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 workers finally decide to take a pay cut. I'll go ahead, I've been out of work for 9 months now, okay, I'll go and ask for $8 or $9 an hour, see if I can get my old job back at the backpack manufacturing facility. It's too late. The things are so bad that an employer, all they're thinking about is laying people off. Under no conditions are they thinking about hiring any more people regardless of the wage. Okay, so that's a slightly different story than the supply side economics. The supply side economics when we told the story of recession, we weren't thinking about time. We just thought, well, the recession will get better when that wage goes down and restores favorable conditions for production and hiring. But here we're saying, let's look at the intervening period, that short period. There's a tendency for things to get worse before they get better. Also, in addition to wages being sticky downward, we might think the price might be sticky downward, which means the company doesn't want to reduce the price. Let's think of our backpacks, right? We have a certain pricing strategy. Our backpacks, we price them a little bit lower than Nike because what we're saying is we're the same quality as, we price our backpacks a little bit lower than North Face because we're saying our packs are the same quality, but we'll sell them for less. We sell our packs a little bit higher than JanSport because we're saying we're qualitatively better than JanSport. That's why our packs are higher. So we might keep our price the same, and this is what we're saying is all producers are doing that, or at least a significant number of them are doing that. And when demand falls, what we do is we keep our price the same, and how we respond to a decrease in demand is just by reducing production and laying off workers. Now, if all producers in the economy respond that way, when demand decreases and price stays the same, quantity demanded takes the full brunt of that decrease in demand. Notice that if there's a decrease in demand and prices come down, then demand doesn't fall that much. Quantity demand doesn't fall that much. But if we keep our prices the same, or we keep charging the same price because we don't want to change our marketing strategy, we want to lay off workers instead, then that's quite a jolt to the economy. And we can think, if that's the way it's responding, what's happening to that ball of the economy that's balanced on that hill? It gets a pretty strong boot off of it and it starts going downhill. Okay, so the point here is that the economy's not adjusting, the market system's not adjusting quite the same here in this demand side approach as we said in the supply side approach, and it operates in a way that makes things worse before they get better. So the end result here is, I'm sure you're listening to me just go on and on and on, and you're thinking, Professor Duncan, come on, get to the happy ending. With supply side, this curve shifts back off out here and we go back to Q star. Well, I'm sorry, but with demand side theory, there's no happy ending. The market doesn't automatically correct itself. The recession continues and it could continue to get worse. All right. So now let's consider the other side of the coin. Let's take a look at the demand side theory if there's a period of high inflation or if there's too much demand. All right. Now what we're going to see here is that this is going to look just like the outcome for supply side economics when there's too much demand. Let's consider this. Let's look at slide number 8. So what happens, we're starting out here at Q star, high level of GDP, we just have natural unemployment. Politicians think we want to get reelected. 5.1% unemployment is too high. We better heat up the economy. If we can get the economy to grow and we can get that unemployment rate down, then we can win the election. So we're going to increase government spending. Okay, the economy grows, unemployment drops below the natural rate. What does that mean? A skilled labor surplus or a skilled labor shortage. Here we only have structurally and frictionally unemployed, and now we even have less than that. All right, so that would mean there is a pretty strong skilled labor shortage, and that means that wages are going to rise. Okay, unemployment, the adjustment is with that skilled labor shortage, wages go up, and wages may be sticky downward. Workers are reluctant to take pay cuts, but they're certainly not reluctant to take a pay increase. So when wages go up, that means the cost of an input rises. I'd add that right there. And when the cost of an input rises, that means aggregate supply is going to decrease. Okay, so this is the same story as the supply side argument. The economy overheats, production is reduced, we move back to Q star. Okay, so and the basic idea here is that the basic difference here is that with recession, wages are sticky downward and the economy doesn't quite work right, the same as the supply side has argued, but when the economy overheats, it pretty much works the same way because wages are not sticky upward. Now, we can think of in the long run, we had a long run aggregate supply curve according to supply side economics, and you'll remember that was straight up and down. Well, with demand side, the demand side view is we're going to have a slightly different long run aggregate supply curve. It's going to look like this. Forget these circles for a moment, but here's our long run aggregate supply curve. When we get close to Q star, it's going to be vertical. But if we're not at full capacity, if we're at less than full capacity, less than Q star, then we're going to have a supply curve that's not going to be straight up and down. It's going to have it might be relatively flat, but it's generally going to be positively sloped. Where am I getting that? Well, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at the demand side view of recession. So if we're below Q star, we're either going to be on this supply curve if wages are sticky downward, or we're going to be on this. This is going to be our supply curve if prices are inflexible downward, right? If no one changes their price, then what happens is quantity demand takes the full brunt and demand falls to here. I just was explaining that. So we can think of the supply curve as being like this if we're below Q star. But if we try to get above Q star, then it starts getting vertical. So here's where we're getting that. If we're in recession, if we're producing less, if we have a lot of unemployment, companies aren't producing as much, their capacity utilization is low, then we have a supply curve that looks like this. What does that mean? That means if we're out here, economic activity is low. The economy can grow without cost pressures that are going to result in higher prices. We've talked about this before. In this circle right here, what I would do right there, I didn't do this, but it's not going to stop you from doing it. I would write down the word slack. We have slack here. Slack means that the economy can produce more without having cost pressures that result in higher prices. The unemployment rate's high. That means we have a skilled labor surplus. We're in the depths of recession. The economy starts to grow. You start producing more at the backpack manufacturing facility. And so what we do is we hire back workers that we laid off, right? They're already trained. They'll take the job at the same old wage. We get a productive worker, relatively low wage costs. Output, our productivity is going to rise much quicker than our wage costs are. No reason to increase prices. Plus, what's our capacity utilization in here? If we're in recession, it's going to be 70%, maybe 60%. We're in the depths of recession. Our capacity utilization is 60%. When the economy starts to grow, we start producing more. We start bringing back workers. Instead of having people doubling up on tasks because we laid them off, we got 10 specialized workstations to produce backpacks. If we have a worker at each workstation, we produce 1,000 packs a day. But in a recession, we're going to cut back production to 700 packs a day. We're going to lay off some workers. But when the economy starts to grow, we're going to start utilizing that facility more efficiently. We're going to start adding the 8th worker, the 9th worker, and we do that. Workers don't have to double up. We have big increase in productivity, relatively small increase in wage. So this curve is just kind of telling that story that we've said all along about low capacity utilization and high unemployment, and we can just think of that as falling under the term of slack. If the economy keeps growing, we start running out of slack, which means we start producing more, then costs start going up and price starts going up. So over here, what's happening? The unemployment rate's going down. It's getting close to the natural rate. We're starting to experience a skilled labor shortage. That means if we keep producing, we have to hire more workers, and our wages start rising quickly, and our productivity doesn't rise that much because we've already got 10 people back. We're hiring 11 and 12. Well, the factory's designed to have 10 specialized workstations. We start hiring 11, 12, 13 workers. They're not doing specialized tasks. they're helping those workers doing specialized tasks. Output's going to rise a little bit, but we got to pay these workers a heck of a lot of money. Or we're working overtime. We're paying everyone time and a half, but our wage costs are rising a lot, but our output's not rising as quickly. Plus, what's happening to our capacity utilization? It's getting close to 85%. We're producing more. I'm sorry, the average for the whole economy is getting to 85%. That means that if the average is 85%, some companies are producing at 90, 100%, maybe over 100%. So that means that we're starting to get to the edge where if we keep growing, production is going to become less efficient and more costly. Okay? So we have a region in recession. We think we would have slack. We can grow, the economy can grow. We can produce more without inflationary pressure, but at some point if the economy keeps growing, then we're going to start running out of slack. Economy keeps growing, you keep producing more, costs are going to go up, prices eventually are going to go up. All right, now let's think about this. Oh, this part in here we're kind of familiar with. All right, because this part in here is basically what I was saying. We're kind of running out of slack. The law of supply assumes that a company is operating at full capacity. You can produce more inefficiently. That's the steep portion of that aggregate supply curve. That's this part. That's where we've run out of slack. Okay? Then this slide, the flat slide, says we can produce more, but we're not going to have labor productivity is even going to either increase or remain constant, but we are going to have relatively stable costs. There's no need to increase price. Okay, and that refers to this portion of the supply curve where we have slack. All right, now next thing we want to do is look for, let's do this. This will be fun. You guys tell me where we are on this supply curve. Are we down here? We have slack. Are we running out of slack, or are we right on the edge? So let's look at the numbers and you tell me what those numbers have to say. We're going to look at capacity utilization and the rate of unemployment, and this is going to be a little challenging. The first bit's going to be easy. Capacity utilization we looked at before, right? And with this number, what we're interested in is if the average for all manufacturing, industrial production, if it gets to be over 85%, then we think if the economy keeps growing, we're just going to be starting to experience inflationary pressures because production is going to become less efficient, more costly. And so we looked at this before January. I'm making this recording in February 2017. So we have the data for last month. Capacity utilization was 75%. So that would suggest that we still got a little slack. We're not close to 85%. 85% we'd be up in here. Okay? Then the next thing we want to look at is the unemployment rate. Now this is where it is difficult. So let's see. When I was making this audio recording, the most recent figure we have is the official unemployment rate is 4.8% for January 2017. Now we compare this to the natural rate of unemployment, which is about 5.1%. So does this suggest a skilled labor surplus or a shortage? That number would suggest a skilled labor shortage, which would mean that we would be at the point where maybe if we produce more, labor costs are going to start going up. Since labor costs are about 2/3 of all costs in the economy, prices are going to start going up. But then let's think about this. Does this make sense? Does this skilled labor surplus reconcile with the fact that we only have 75% of industrial capacity being utilized? Those numbers don't seem to match up. And what makes this example a little tough is the fact that the unemployment rate, remember, is based on the number of people looking for work. And we had a rather severe recession way back in 2008, 2009 that wiped out a lot of jobs, and a lot of people left the labor market and kind of stayed out for a long period of time. So what might be useful is to consider alternative definitions of the unemployment rate. And we've looked at this before. If we look at those who are marginally attached, if we look at official unemployment plus those people that are marginally attached, and that means they are not working, they are looking for work, and they're indicating that they're available, but they haven't um, looked for work in the last 12 months. Not 4 weeks that's based on, but 12 months. And then we also include people that are working part-time for economic reasons. They'd like to work full-time. If that's the case, then the unemployment rate is 9.4%. And that's probably consistent with this capacity utilization that's at 75%. So we kind of have mixed results. What makes this difficult is we got to think, how many of these people have current job market skills? All right, that gets to be a little bit difficult to think about. All right, because if they've been out of work for a long time, maybe don't have current job market skills, and so they're essentially structurally unemployed. So that one, we're getting mixed data. The unemployment rate information suggests we're up here. The capacity utilization thinks we're here. Where do you think we are? I know what you're thinking. Split the difference. We're kind of right there. We're right on the corner where maybe we're starting to run out of slack. If the economy starts to grow, then maybe we're going to experience higher costs that are going to force producers to raise prices. Okay, now let's see. Oh, now another thing. So this is very useful. This graph right here is a very useful way to think about the economy. Where are we? Demand can be anywhere along here that determines the level of economic activity, but if we have slack or no slack, that tells us something about what inflation is going to be. All right. Now, another important lesson from this is that, according to this view, demand side view, there's no guarantee that we're going to be producing at Q star. Remember from supply side economics that we always snap back to Q star. But demand side view says the level of GDP depends on the level of spending. So if spending, here's our long run aggregate supply curve, if the level of spending is low, if aggregate demand is low, then economic activity is going to be low. If the level of spending is going to be high, then if the level of spending is high, then the level of economic activity is going to be high. All right, so we can be anywhere along here. There's no guarantee we're going to be at Q star at any one spot. It's variable. It just depends on what the level of spending is. If the economy is moving in recession and most momentum is indicating we're losing jobs, incomes are going down, spending's going down, then the economy is going to be sliding down this portion. If the economy is recovering and there's starting to be some jobs created and incomes are going up and spending's going up, then maybe it's going to move this way. But where we are ultimately depends on what the level of demand, what the level of spending is. That's the idea. Okay. Now we'll return to this slide in a moment, but this gives us some very useful information on what's called the Phillips curve. We can draw a similarity between this Phillips curve and this aggregate supply, aggregate demand curve. Okay. Let's look at this for a moment. This Phillips curve. What this Phillips curve shows is the relationship between the inflation rate and the unemployment rate. So I have, and basically it's pretty easy to come up with a Phillips curve. All you do is pick a series of years, and I've got information here from the 1960s, and I've got, say, for 1961, the unemployment rate was about 6.5%, and the inflation rate was quite low. It was just slightly over 1%. That's the unemployment and inflation rate for that year. And in 1961, the U.S. was in recession, as you can tell, because high levels of unemployment and then relatively low inflation. And then as we move up the Phillips curve, what happens is the economy is recovering in the 1960s, and the unemployment rate goes down and the inflation rate goes up. Okay, so if we go 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, all the way to 1969, gosh, the unemployment rate was below 4%, very low unemployment, but the inflation rate was 6.5%. Now, we would expect this relationship because of the concept of a skilled labor surplus or a skilled labor shortage, right? Here, in 1961, unemployment rate quite high. A lot of people were laid off in a recession. There's a surplus of skilled workers amongst the unemployed. So the economy can grow and companies can hire laid off workers back without having much cost pressure to increase their prices. Okay? When the economy, by the time 1969 rolls around, the economy's been growing that whole period, very long expansion, and what's the unemployment rate? It's pretty low. We think it would be below the natural rate. Got a skilled labor shortage here. Everyone who got laid off has got their job back. Who's left to hire? The economy's growing. You want to produce more. You got to hire more workers. But all that's left are people that are new to the labor market. They just finished school. They don't have any current job market skills, or they're structurally unemployed. So they don't have current. You got to train them, or you got to find some other workers who are trained. But all that suggests, when the unemployment rate is that low, is that wages are going to be rising and labor costs are going to be rising, and that's going to exert pressure on all prices. All right? So this is a nice little curve, and it's very useful because in 1960s the curve looked like this. 70s and 80s, if you get the Phillips curve, it does all kinds of strange things. It starts shifting out this way. It almost starts looping around. But generally, at any given time, generally we tend to see that when the unemployment rate goes down, inflation goes up. And that is the point here is in the financial news, they don't talk about the Phillips curve. But that is the basic implication, is that in the financial news, if there's any sign that the unemployment rate is going down, what's the implication? Inflation's going to be going up. That's the basic idea behind a Phillips curve. Okay? Why we think if the unemployment rate goes down is that we're going to start having a skilled labor shortage, labor costs go up, prices go up. So this graph corresponds to the points on this. Let's consider this. Let's call this point A. This is what I would do in your notes. I'd put point A right here, because at point A we have low level of spending, we have a low level of GDP, we're going to have a lot of people unemployed. So at point A and at low GDP, the unemployment rate is going to be high, the price level is going to be pretty low. That's consistent with, where's point A on this? Here or down here? Here's point A. Because we're at a low level of economic activity, the unemployment rate's high, inflation is relatively low. On this graph, here, if the level of demand is quite high, then we're at a point where the level of economic activity is quite high, GDP is quite high. That means the unemployment rate is low. And when that's the case, the price level is quite high because we've kind of run out of slack, right? And that's consistent with point B up here. Because if the level of economic activity is high, GDP is high, the unemployment rate is going to be low. And we're going to have a skilled labor shortage, and inflation is going to be higher. Okay? So that's the idea behind the Phillips curve. It's a nice little picture that tells us what we already know. And if the unemployment rate goes down, inflation is going to go up because we have a skilled labor shortage, upward pressure on wages, labor costs, all costs and prices. If we have a skilled labor surplus, there's really no upward pressure on wages. We can hire skilled workers, same old wage, get a productive worker. There's no upward pressure on labor costs or other costs. Inflation is going to be relatively low. All right, now let's go back to this. So the key thing with demand side theory is GDP depends on the level of spending. Spending's high, spending's low. Economic activity is going to be high or low. Now another point about, remember we had Say's law for supply side economics that really drove home the point of supply, right? Because Say's law said that supply creates its own demand. Demand will always keep up with supply. You focus on production, your economy is going to grow. That's what you want to focus on. With demand side economics, we have what's called the paradox of thrift, which illustrates the importance of spending and the unimportance or the danger of savings. Okay? Because the paradox of thrift states that if everybody, you, I, everyone else in our class, tried to save money, we would not all be able to do so. How the heck does that happen? If everyone in our classroom economy tried to save money, not everyone would be able to do so. What happens? Well, if we all decide to save, that means we're going to spend less. So that means when we spend less, we're not going to buy as many backpacks, right? In our classroom production example. And if we're not buying as many backpacks, then the backpack producer's not going to sell as much, not going to produce as much, it's going to lay someone off. If someone gets laid off, are they going to be able to save? No. That's the paradox of thrift. All right? So while supply side economics said focus on production, demand will keep up, demand side economics says spending is the key thing. It determines your level of economic activity. Supply side economics viewed savings as being good. You want to have more savings because that provides more resources for companies to finance their capital formation. In demand side economics, particularly if we're in a recession, savings is not good. Everyone has the inclination to try to save in a recession. I might lose my job. I'm going to stop spending. I'm going to save money. What does that do? That makes the economy worse. Okay? So the implications here are from this is that in a recession, we talked about this before with supply side economics, given the supply side view of the economy, what should government do? Same thing here. Given this demand side story of how the economy responds in recession, what should the government do? Does the government need to intervene? The implication here from demand side theory is that it does, because what you need to have is more spending. And in a recession, can you count on consumers and companies to increase their spending? No, because they have poor expectations in recession. Because the recession, especially if it's a severe recession, that just reinforces poor expectations. A company might think what kind of started our recession was a company thinking the good times are over. I'm going to cut back a little bit because I think things aren't going to be growing as much as they did. Enough of our companies do that. I goes down. They stop investing in their plant and equipment. They stop spending on their plant and equipment. They lay off some workers. C goes down. The ball of the economy starts rolling downhill. Demand starts falling. And they thought things were going to get worse, and everything did get worse. Once the recession starts, consumers start thinking, well, gosh, they're starting to lay people off at work. I better start saving money in case I lose my job instead of spending. Well, if every consumer starts doing that, demand starts falling even further, the economy gets worse and worse and worse. So in a sense, we have negative momentum because of poor expectations by consumers and companies. They're spending less. All right. So the idea here is that government spending is important. You'd want to pursue expansionary fiscal policy. You'd want to cut taxes for corporations and for consumers. But is that going to solve the problem? Probably not, because everyone's more savings oriented. You know, if the demand side theory says if you are going to cut taxes, you want to cut taxes for people with low incomes because they're more likely to spend. But cutting taxes may not be the most effective way of stimulating the economy, because if you give someone $1 worth of tax break, maybe they're going to spend that whole buck, but they're more likely to set some of that aside. What's far more effective, according to this view, is that you spend that $1 worth of government money, spending it directly, maybe on infrastructure or whatever, some kind of government purchase where it goes directly into the economy and stimulates it. All right, that's kind of the implication from demand side theory, and that's what we see. That's a lesson learned in the Great Depression. It's old, but we still see during the Clinton administration, when Bill Clinton was elected president in 1992, the economy was just recovering from recession. His plan was basically demand side. wanted to spend money on infrastructure. Government spending was the key thing. President Obama, during the Great Recession, rather severe and long recession, the economy contracted for 18 months. It didn't start growing, and it didn't recover for a long period of time, but it contracted for 18 months. It ended when the economy stopped contracting, but it was still a low level of economic activity. How he responded was by the big stimulus, the big policy was the stimulus plan, $850 billion in government spending, basically on highway construction, with some tax incentives for cash for clunkers or first-time homebuyer tax credits that were meant to kind of increase spending on automobiles and housing, but most of it was on government spending. Okay? And the idea here is that when government spends, it's going to borrow savings. Now, in a pure economic sense, the justification for a deficit in a recession is people are saving in a recession, and that savings is money that's not spent. If government borrows it, they're reintroducing that savings into the spending stream of the economy. So the government runs a deficit, right? And that's the justification. The demand side justification for a deficit is that we don't chronically have them. We have them when we need them when we're in recession. When the economy grows and everyone's got a job and there's high levels of spending, there's no need to run a deficit to stimulate the economy further, right? Now, there's our Phillips curve, and then we can talk about other implied policies. The idea here, again, is consistent with demand side. The idea with demand side theory is that the economy can be thought of as a ball on a hill, and as long as there's lots of spending, it keeps that ball balanced on top of that hill. But if there's a reduction in spending, then that ball starts rolling downhill, because if there's less spending, the paradox of thrift tells us that if there's less spending, someone's going to lose their job. That means their income goes down. That means spending goes down. That means someone else is going to lose their job. That means their income is going to go down, spending goes down, so that ball starts rolling downhill. And there aren't any market adjustments that the economy doesn't adjust on its own to rebalance it. Okay, so there were New Deal policies during the Roosevelt administration and the Great Depression. A lot of new spending policies were introduced to increase the level of spending and economic activity, and we see the same things during the Great Recession. President Obama kind of mimicked these, the spending policies. All right, basically increasing government spending stays the same, and the basic idea is that when government spending increases, in a way it primes the pump, because it's going to alter expectations. When government spending, consider our classroom economy, we're in recession, things are going downhill. If government starts spending and buying packs from our pack producer, then what's going to happen? The pack producer is going to think, oh gosh, demand's going up. I need to produce more packs. To produce more packs, what do I got to do? I have to hire some more workers back, and maybe if pack demand's high enough, maybe I better modernize my machinery. So I'm going to spend money on that. And then when the employer hires workers back, consumers have a job, they have an income. They start spending their income. Consumers and companies, their expectations start to change because the economy's starting to grow. And when the economy grows, then it restores favorable expectations. The company starts thinking things are looking better in the future. I think demand's going to keep growing. I'm going to spend money on more machinery. Consumers start seeing their employment going up, their income's going up, and so they start thinking things are getting better. I'm going to start spending again. Okay, because I haven't spent money for a long time. My washer's worn out, my refrigerator's worn out. I got to replace these things. And when their expectations change, then they start spending more, and the economy gains more momentum. And the key thing here is what triggered it, what primed the pump of spending, is that government spending started it all.